It is 11 at night, and it rains as if the sky were purging something it cannot name. You are sitting in your office on the second floor of a building with no elevator in the Narvarte neighborhood, Mexico City, and the water seeps through a crack in the ceiling you have been promising yourself to repair for 8 months. Each drop falls into a plastic bucket with a cadence that, ironically, resembles the metronome you used in your first cognitive behavioral therapy sessions when you still believed psychology could save the world. You are 42 years old, you hold a master's degree in clinical psychology with a specialization in cluster B personality disorders, an unfinished doctorate because you could not pay for the last semester, and a bank account that oscillates between 3,000 and 5,000 pesos, depending on how many patients cancel that week. And they cancel often. They always cancel. Your office smells of dampness and instant coffee. The walls have that yellowish tone that betrays years of tobacco and neglect. And the couch you bought at an auction from a shuttered practice has a stain on the left armrest you could never fully remove. On the shelf, next to your books by Otto Kernberg, Melanie Klein, and the DSM-5 with its peeling cover, there is a photograph of your 11-year-old daughter, Valentina, who lives with your ex-wife in Querétaro, and whom you see 2 weekends a month when you can afford the gasoline. That photograph is the only clean thing in the entire room. You look at it every night before closing and feel something that is not exactly sadness, but a more corrosive variant. The certainty that you are a profoundly mediocre man who understood the rules of the game far too late. Because you understand them, that is your problem. You are not stupid. You are a man who can diagnose a narcissistic personality disorder with antisocial traits in 15 minutes of conversation, who can detect facial micro-expressions of contempt in the orbicularis muscle of a patient who claims to be happy, who can map the defense mechanisms of a person the way one disassembles a Swiss watch, but who cannot convince his landlord to give him 1 more week to pay the rent. You are brilliant at the useless and clumsy at the necessary. And that night, while the rain strikes the windows and you review your empty schedule for the next day, your phone rings. Not the personal cell phone with the cracked screen, but the office landline. That device almost nobody uses, and whose number only appears on a business card you hand out at conferences you can no longer attend. You answer out of inertia, expecting a wrong number or a patient wanting to cancel in advance. The voice on the other end is male, calm, polished, with a barely perceptible northern accent, as if it had been filed down through years of travel or conscious effort. He tells you that an acquaintance recommended your services, that he needs a discreet professional for therapy sessions, that the schedule would be nocturnal, that the payment would be 15,000 pesos per weekly session. You repeat the figure mentally. 15,000 pesos per session. That is 60,000 pesos a month, more than you earn in 3 good months. You ask who referred him, and the voice says a name you do not recognize. You ask what the reason for consultation is, and the voice says, with a courtesy that sounds rehearsed, that they will discuss it in person. You ask where the session would take place, and the voice says they will send a vehicle for you. That is where a psychologist with common sense would hang up. That is where any professional with a minimum of survival instinct would say he does not make house calls, that his hours are 9 to 6, that he needs a verifiable reference. But you do not hang up. You do not hang up because 3 days earlier, you received an email from Valentina's school informing you that tuition for the next trimester has increased to 18,000 pesos, and that there is an outstanding balance of 2 months. You do not hang up because your ex-wife sent you a message that said, without cruelty, but with an honesty that hurts more than any insult, that if you cannot cover the expenses, she will find a way, but that then there is no point in pretending that shared custody works. You do not hang up because you have been taking clonazepam to sleep for 6 months, and the prescription ran out and your attending psychiatrist, who treated you as a professional courtesy, moved to Spain. You do not hang up because the rain keeps falling into the bucket, because the office smells of defeat, and because 15,000 pesos for listening to someone talk is exactly what you studied to do. It is just therapy. It is just your job. It is the lie that allows you to say yes. The vehicle arrives the following Thursday at 9 in the evening. It is a black Suburban with windows tinted to the point of illegality. No, visible plates. The driver is a man of about 30, the build of someone who lifts weights out of discipline rather than vanity, with a military haircut and a pistol you glimpse briefly when he adjusts his belt, a 9mm Beretta in a worn leather shoulder holster. He does not speak to you. He does not look at you. He opens the rear door and you ride for 45 minutes through the city until you arrive at a residential area in Lomas de Chapultepec that you did not even know existed. A gated street with private security booths, cameras on every corner, and 3-meter walls crowned with motion sensors. The house is a structure of contemporary architecture, all exposed concrete, bulletproof glass, and gardens designed by someone who charges more per square meter of lawn than you charge per hour of therapy. You are received in a foyer with travertine marble floors, a Javier Marin sculpture on an illuminated pedestal, and a scent of sandalwood emanating from a diffuser that probably costs what you pay in rent. A young woman, dressed in black, with a security earpiece, guides you down a hallway to a room that has been converted into a study. There are 2 leather armchairs, a low table with a water pitcher, and 2 cut crystal glasses, indirect lighting, professional soundproofing on the walls. Someone prepared this space thinking specifically about a therapeutic session. That unsettles you more than the driver's pistol, because it implies premeditation, research, knowledge of what you need to work. You sit and wait. 7 minutes later, a man of about 55 enters, medium height, slender but not fragile, gray hair combed back, a 3-day beard perfectly trimmed, eyes of a brown so dark it looks black. He wears a white linen shirt without a tie, gray dress trousers, Italian loafers without socks. He has no visible tattoos, no obvious scars, none of the aesthetic that television associates with organized crime. He looks like a successful architect, a university professor, a retired diplomat. He sits across from you, crosses his leg, looks at you with a genuine curiosity you recognize because you have seen that same gaze in patients with high-functioning narcissistic traits. People who study others the way one examines a mechanism to determine its usefulness. He tells you his name is Aurelio, that it is probably not his real name, but it is the one he will use with you, and that he needs to talk to someone who understands how the mind works without judging it. He does not say what he does for a living. He does not need to. The house, the security, the plateless Suburban, the nocturnal hour, the cash payment that appears in a manila envelope on the table before the session begins, all of it tells you exactly who Aurelio is, or rather, what he is. And what you do in that moment is what they taught you in school, what you have done 10,000 times. You open your notebook, take your pen, and ask where he would like to begin. The first sessions are a chess match. Aurelio is not a common patient. He does not arrive with disorganized anguish or acute symptoms. He arrives with a psychic structure you recognize immediately because you have studied it for years in the texts of Robert Hare and Hervey Cleckley. He is an individual with marked traits of instrumental psychopathy, a high capacity for emotional compartmentalization, verbal intelligence above average, and an internally coherent belief system that justifies every action he has ever taken in his life. He is not chaotic. He is methodically rational. In the second session, he tells you he has had insomnia for 3 years, that he wakes at exactly 3 in the morning and cannot fall back asleep, that he has tried zolpidem, trazodone, extended-release melatonin, and nothing works. You mentally apply the insomnia severity index and the perceived stress scale as he speaks, and you detect indicators of a complex post-traumatic stress disorder encapsulated beneath layers of rationalization and control. In the third session, you use a cognitive restructuring technique to explore the automatic thoughts that precede the nocturnal awakening. And you discover there is always a sensory trigger, a smell. Aurelio wakes when his brain reproduces, in the architecture of slow-wave sleep. The smell of burnt diesel mixed with something organic he cannot identify, but that you suspect, with a chill that runs down your spinal column like a low-voltage electrical discharge, is the smell of carbonized human flesh. He does not say it, he does not need to, but his body says it for him. The pupils dilate 2 millimeters, his breathing shifts from 14 to 20 cycles per minute. His hands tense on the armrests and the veins on their backs stand out like rivers on a topographic map. You are sitting before a man who has seen things most people cannot imagine, who has probably ordered them, and whose own nervous system now betrays him in the darkness of 3 in the morning. The morning, because the body always remembers what the mind decides to forget. And this is where your training becomes something dangerous, because you are good at this. You are genuinely, uncomfortably good. In the 4th session, you apply a variant of the desensitization reprocessing technique, adapted because you do not have the EMDR equipment, but you do have your voice, your cadence, your ability to guide a patient's attention toward the core of the trauma, without the psychic defenses activating like an alarm system. And it works. Aurelio sleeps 5 consecutive hours for the first time in 3 years. He tells you this in the 5th session with an expression that is not gratitude exactly, but something more disturbing. Recognition. He looks at you the way a general looks at an engineer who has just repaired a weapon no one else could fix. And you realize, with the clarity that only 2 in the morning and the cold light of a designer lamp in a house worth more than everything you will earn in your lifetime can provide, that you have just become indispensable to a man to whom no one should ever be indispensable. The manila envelope at the 6th session contains 25,000 pesos instead of 15,000. There is no explanation, no note, just the money. Aurelio tells you at the start of the session that he has a problem with one of his associates. He does not use the word associate naturally. He pronounces it like someone choosing a euphemism with surgical care. He tells you this associate has begun making erratic decisions, that he has developed a problematic cocaine habit that is affecting his operational judgment, that the previous week he authorized an action without consulting that resulted in the loss of a shipment valued at $4 million and the deaths of 3 people who were not supposed to die. Aurelio describes the situation with the same coldness with which a chief executive would describe a failed corporate merger. He asks for your professional opinion, and this is where you cross a line you cannot even see because it is drawn in invisible ink on a floor that looks solid, but is ice. You tell him that what he describes sounds like a pattern of cognitive deterioration associated with chronic stimulant abuse, that the individual's prefrontal cortex probably shows a reduction in impulse inhibition and risk assessment capacity, that the prognosis without intervention is an escalation of unpredictable behaviors that will endanger the entire structure. Aurelio nods slowly. He asks you if the condition is reversible. You tell him that with a supervised detoxification program and intensive therapy, possibly, but that it would require the individual to accept treatment voluntarily. Aurelio is silent for 11 seconds that you count involuntarily, because your therapist brain always counts silences. Then he says, in the same voice with which he would order a cortado, that the individual will not accept voluntarily. You tell him that the only remaining therapeutic option is a structured confrontation intervention involving significant persons from the patient's environment. Aurelio smiles for the first time in 6 sessions. It is a smile that does not reach his eyes. He tells you that is exactly what he needed to hear. You do not understand the full implication of that smile until 3 days later, when you see on a local news portal that a businessman from the north of the country was found dead in a hotel room in Mazatlan with an official diagnosis of cardiac arrest, but with enough forensic inconsistencies that the article mentions, between the lines, that the autopsy revealed ligature marks on the wrists and anomalous blood potassium levels consistent with the intravenous administration of potassium chloride. It was not a therapeutic intervention. It was a death sentence, and you provided, without knowing it, or perhaps knowing it in some corner of your mind, you chose not to illuminate the diagnosis that justified it. That night you do not sleep. You take 2 clonazepam tablets and half a trazodone and lie on your single bed in your 40 square meter apartment that smells of reheated food and loneliness. And you stare at the ceiling for hours while your limbic system replays on a loop the smile of Aurelio, and your prefrontal cortex, that same organ you describe so well in your clinical evaluations, desperately tries to construct a narrative in which you are not responsible. You tell yourself you did not know. You tell yourself that a psychologist does not control what the patient does with the information. You tell yourself that therapeutic confidentiality protects you legally, and that your code of ethics does not contemplate this situation, because no code of ethics was written to contemplate that your patient is the leader of a criminal organization that bills $200 million annually in the trafficking of crystal methamphetamine to the North American market through a network of underground tunnels crossing the border between Tijuana and San Diego. In the months that follow, you become something that has no name in any psychology manual. You are not Aurelio's therapist. You are his instrument of human calibration. Aurelio discovers that your ability to read people is more valuable than any electronic surveillance system, and begins to take you, always at night, always in the plateless suburban, to meetings where your job consists of sitting in a corner, observing, and then reporting. He tells you he wants your reading of the people with whom he negotiates. And you do it. You do it because the payment is now 40,000 pesos per session, because Valentina is now enrolled in a bilingual school with a science laboratory and an international exchange program, because you paid off the debt on the office and the crack in the ceiling and bought a new couch of genuine leather imported from Argentina, because your ex-wife looks at you with a renewed respect that hurts because you know it is built on lies. You do it because you are extraordinarily good at it. At a meeting in a private restaurant in Polanco, you observe for 90 minutes a man whom Aurelio introduces as a potential investor for a money laundering operation through a chain of industrial laundromats in Guadalajara. You notice that the man exhibits an accelerated blink rate when he mentions specific figures, that he diverts his gaze to the lower left when he speaks of his contacts at customs, that he has an almost imperceptible tick in his right ring finger that activates every time Aurelio mentions the word trust. Afterward, in the car, you tell Aurelio the man is lying about at least 3 fundamental aspects of his proposal: that he is probably cooperating with some investigative agency or is attempting to mount an independent operation using Aurelio's resources as a platform. You explain that the deception indicators are not individually conclusive, but that the convergence of parasympathetic signals suggests a level of stress incompatible with someone telling the truth. Aurelio listens with absolute attention, like a surgeon listening to the results of an MRI before operating. 2 weeks later, you learn through a fragment of conversation you were not meant to hear that the investor was found in the Sonoran Desert, 80 kilometers from any passable road, with his hands bound with industrial tape and a .45 caliber gunshot to the base of the skull. The type of execution forensic experts call a coup de grace, and which in the technical language of terminal ballistics means the projectile enters through the external occipital protuberance, traverses the brainstem, and exits through the orbital cavity, destroying in milliseconds all capacity for thought, for pain, for existence. And you made the diagnosis. You pointed out the man. You, with your master's degree in clinical psychology and your encyclopedic knowledge of the facial microexpressions in Paul Ekman's facial action coding system, became the human lie detector of a drug trafficking cartel. The vomiting comes that night without warning, a visceral spasm that doubles you over the bathroom sink while gastric acid burns your throat and tears spring not from sadness, but from a comprehension so acute it is almost physical. Your hands are clean, but your mind is the weapon. Aurelio begins to treat you differently. You are no longer the hired professional. You are something closer, more dangerous. He invites you to dinner with his family. You meet his wife, Lucia, a 48-year-old woman with a doctorate in art history from the University of Salamanca, who speaks eloquently about Caravaggio and the chiaroscuro technique while serving Valencian paella on Limoges porcelain dinnerware. You meet his daughter, Renata, 14 years old, who plays the cello and has a laugh that sounds exactly like Valentina's, and that coincidence destroys you inside, with a precision no scalpel could replicate. You watch Aurelio cut bread with the same hands that sign execution orders. You watch him tuck Renata's hair behind her ear with a tenderness that is not feigned. You watch him look at Lucia with a devotion that is not performance either, and you understand, with the brutal clarity that only clinical psychology applied to direct observation provides, that Aurelio is not a monster pretending at humanity. He is a human being who has integrated monstrosity into his psychic structure in a functional, compartmentalized, sustainable way. He is a man who can read the Odyssey in classical Greek in his library at 8 in the evening, order the dissolution of a body in caustic soda at 10, and pray a rosary with his mother over the phone at 11. And the most terrifying thing of all, what steals your sleep more than any image of violence, is that you understand him. You do not merely diagnose him, you understand him. Because your training taught you to see the world from another's perspective without losing your own. But you have spent so long inside Aurelio's perspective that you are no longer certain where his logic ends and yours begins. In session number 23, Aurelio tells you something that changes the geometry of your existence. He tells you he trusts you more than anyone in his organization, that you are the only human being with whom he can be honest without calculating the consequences, that your sessions are the only thing keeping him functional. He tells you this looking into your eyes with a vulnerability you know is genuine, because you have spent 20 years learning to distinguish genuine vulnerability from simulated vulnerability. And in that moment, you understand that you have become the most important and most imprisoned person in the structure. Because if Aurelio depends on you emotionally, he will never let you go. And if you try to leave, you are not a therapist resigning from a patient. You are a repository of classified information, attempting to abandon an organization that has no termination clause. Your knowledge of Aurelio's psychology, of his fears, of his traumas, of the defense mechanisms he uses to justify his actions, of the emotional fissures through which he could break, is information that any prosecutor's office, any intelligence agency, any rival cartel would pay a fortune to obtain. You are a living archive of the weaknesses of the most dangerous man in the country. And archives in this business are not erased. They are destroyed. A clinical psychologist, already serving as personal therapist and behavioral profiler for Aurelio, a Mexican organized crime leader, reaches his breaking point when Aurelio asks him to design a psychological interrogation protocol to detect traitors within the organization. The protagonist refuses for the first time, but Aurelio responds by showing him a telephoto photograph of his daughter Valentina taken the previous day, outside her school in Querétaro. Without a single word spoken, the threat is absolute. The psychologist capitulates, and over 3 weeks builds a technically flawless, yet ethically monstrous system, combining elements of the Minnesota multiphasic personality inventory, inverted motivational interviewing techniques, heart rate variability analysis via pulse oximetry, and guides for reading nonverbal deception indicators, including gaze direction, foot positioning, facial symmetry, and vocal tone shifts measured in hertz. When the protocol is first deployed, the evaluated subject triggers 14 of 20 deception markers. 3 days later, he is found inside the trunk of a torched Nissan Suru on a dirt road in Michoacán, his body curled in a fetal position that forensic examiners attribute to heat-induced muscular contraction, but that the protagonist knows from his clinical study of extreme trauma responses could also mean the man was alive when the fire began. That night, sitting on his bathroom floor, he administers the post-traumatic stress disorder assessment scale to himself and meets diagnostic criteria across every category: intrusive re-experiencing, avoidance, negative cognitive alterations, autonomic hyperactivation. Fully aware he can name his own unraveling with clinical precision, but is powerless to halt it. Meanwhile, he constructs a carefully maintained facade of normalcy with Aurelio's money. A hardwood-floored apartment in the Condesa overlooking a park, a German car, a Swiss watch bought on Masaryk, and a daytime practice where he still sees legitimate patients with generalized anxiety and moderate depression who have no idea the empathetic professional listening to them. Also designs traitor detection systems for an organization shipping 500 kilograms of methamphetamine weekly through avocado containers in the port of Manzanillo. Behind the facade, however, he self-medicates with precisely dosed sertraline and anxiolytics, rotates disposable phones every 15 days, and keeps a go-bag by the door containing $50,000 in moisture-proof bundles and 3 passports under different names that Aurelio provided unsolicited. Most critically, he possesses an encrypted USB drive holding a 47-page psychological profile of Aurelio Sanchez Montiel. His real name, uncovered through the protagonist's own clinical investigation, documenting his defense mechanisms, emotional triggers, narcissistic vulnerabilities, 3 unconfessed phobias, and the foundational trauma of witnessing a woman murdered before him at 16, the origin of his complex post-traumatic stress disorder. That file is simultaneously his life insurance, and, if discovered prematurely, his guaranteed death. The final crisis detonates on a Friday in March when Aurelio arrives at session visibly frightened. Asymmetric pupillary dilation, a 4 Hz rise in vocal fundamental frequency, masseter rigidity from nocturnal, bruxism, and reveals that a sealed indictment has been issued by a grand jury in the Southern District of New York, that the DEA has an informant inside his organization whom the protocol has failed to identify, and that he needs the psychologist to evaluate him personally to find the leak. In that moment, driven not by courage but by a purely reptilian survival calculation executed by his amygdala before his frontal cortex can intervene, the protagonist tells Aurelio what he wants to hear. His personality structure is solid. The informant was likely recruited through legal pressure rather than psychological manipulation, and the suspect pool narrows to individuals with prior criminal records vulnerable to sentencing threats. He provides 3 names, chosen not from evidence but from the highest susceptibility to pressure scores in his own protocol. He knows at least 2 are probably innocent. He says them anyway, because failing to produce names would redirect suspicion toward the only person who knows everything and identified no one. All 3 men vanish within 10 days. The protocol fails catastrophically. The real informant turns out to be Aurelio's 61-year-old accountant, a diabetic man whose grandson has leukemia and whose Houston medical treatment the DEA was funding in exchange for cooperation. A motivation rooted in desperate love rather than fear of incarceration, producing none of the physiological markers the protocol was designed to catch. 3 innocent men died from a diagnostic error. Aurelio is arrested at dawn in a joint Mexican Navy and United States federal operation at his Lomas de Chapultepec mansion, in front of his wife Lucia and his daughter Renata. 24 hours later, an agent from the Attorney General's office visits the protagonist's Condesa office and presents 2 options on letterhead paper: a formal indictment for criminal conspiracy, complicity in aggravated homicide, and organized crime participation carrying 30 to 50 years in maximum security, or a cooperation agreement requiring testimony before the New York grand jury, surrender of the psychological profile the accountant revealed exists, and permanent relocation under witness protection. He chooses cooperation, not from principle but from the same survival instinct that has driven every decision since the beginning. He testifies for 3 days in a Manhattan federal courtroom, hands over all 47 pages, and betrays professional confidentiality with the same technical precision with which he built it. The prosecutor calls him a star witness. Aurelio's defense attorney calls him a mercenary without ethics. Neither is wrong. Aurelio watches from the defense table with an expression worse than hatred. The look of a patient who finally understands his therapist never saw him as a person, only as a case. A man who entrusted himself to the one human being who knew exactly how trust is constructed and how it is annihilated. Aurelio receives life plus 40 years at the maximum security federal prison in Florence, Colorado. The protagonist now lives under a fabricated identity in a small northern Canadian city, in a one-bedroom apartment where the central heating hums like a broken metronome. His psychology license has been revoked. He cannot practice because every time someone sits across from him expecting understanding, he feels the crushing weight of everyone he understood too well. He writes fictional letters to Valentina every 2 months through a program intermediary, inventing a life with an office job, a lakeside apartment, and a cat named after a character from a book he once read to her. He sleeps little, wakes at 3 in the morning, the same hour Aurelio used to wake, and counts seconds of silence in a room that smells of nothing, in a city that sounds like nothing. On his nightstand sits a bottle of sleeping pills he counts every night, not because he is considering that, he tells himself, but because counting is the only thing that calms him. Pupils, hurts, silences, pills, the dead. He is free and he is alive. But freedom without identity is just another cell. And life without the ability to face a mirror without seeing the faces of those he destroyed is just another sentence. And each night, with a vividness that freezes his blood more than the Canadian winter, his brain faithfully reproduces the ghost of a sandalwood scent that does not exist in the room, because the body always remembers what the mind decides to forget.